there's a lot that you can do by practicing daily habits that soothe your nervous system. So that's one really important piece of the puzzle, is to focus on ways to soothe your nervous system. I find that women in perimenopause can often feel like you're always in overdrive. I think a lot of women push themselves to go, go, go. And this is a time in life that we have to do the best that we can do to sort of soothe and regulate the stress response.
Welcome back to another episode of the Fasting Method podcast. This is Coach Terri Lance, and I am very excited to be joined today by Coach Amy Medling. And Amy, in getting us started today, I wondered if you could just kind of tell us a little bit about you and the work that you do that is so relevant to this topic that we're going to talk today about perimenopause.
Yeah, well, thank you, Terri, so much for having me on the podcast. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. I'm a coach at the Fasting Method, and I really work with women in all phases of life, from their cycling years through perimenopause, menopause, and beyond. And after spending over a decade coaching women with PCOS, I really now help clients navigate that next phase of their hormonal adventure, perimenopause and menopause, really helping clients work through those metabolic and hormonal shifts that happen as we age by using fasting and lifestyle strategies that we learn about at the Fasting Method. But I think it would probably be a good exercise to just kind of define what perimenopause is before we get into the remedies for it.
Absolutely. And again, I feel like this is such a great topic for so many of our listeners, regardless of what phase of their cycle that they're in, because if it's not currently happening for them, it will, or it has. And there's so much value in knowing this information that you're going to share. So I'm a little bit of a blank slate here. What do I need to know about perimenopause?
Well, I think it's important to know that it's not a moment in time. It's really a sequence of hormonal events that can begin as early as your mid to late 30s and last anywhere from 2 to 12 years before your final menstrual period. And I think the average age is about 51 for that. But you certainly can go longer. I'm 54 and I'm still in perimenopause. So it really varies for every woman. But the process usually begins with a drop in progesterone, which can lead to symptoms in and of itself, like trouble sleeping and anxiety. Progesterone is the calming hormone. So as that depletes, you will find yourself maybe being a little more anxious and agitated. That drop in progesterone can also lead to heavier periods. And then that is followed by kind of highly fluctuating estrogen, and then eventually a more sustained drop in estrogen, which can absolutely affect insulin sensitivity and metabolism. So if you haven't had problems with weight gain or blood sugar control in your 20s and 30s, but then all of a sudden it just hits you and you don't really understand why you're gaining weight or why you're having some of these not so nice symptoms, it's often because of that drop in estrogen and that low progesterone. But also, perimenopause begins with that low progesterone and high estrogen that can lead to estrogen dominance. And we can talk about that as well. But towards the end of perimenopause, it will end with low estrogen. And with that low estrogen, often impaired insulin metabolism. So that entire phase, plus the first few years of menopause, it really is a critical window for long-term health. So if you're here at the Fasting Method working on your health with reducing your insulin resistance with fasting and refueling, eating nutrient-dense foods and working on your sleep and stress reduction, that is all going to go a very long way to helping you improve your symptoms and then also improve your long-term health. The other thing that kind of comes hand in hand with these perimenopause hormonal fluctuations is also thyroid issues. And while they aren't specifically caused by perimenopause, they often worsen and become more symptomatic during this time. And often it can be caused by high cortisol levels. So one of the other hormonal factors in perimenopause is because progesterone is lower, there is an opportunity for increased cortisol. And also there's an opportunity, it kind of goes hand in hand. We call it the cortisol steal. So at this stage of life, life is stressful. We have work, we have families, we're balancing children and potentially aging parents. And as our cortisol levels increase, cortisol depletes progesterone even further because our body prioritizes cortisol production. And then this just creates this negative feedback loop where low progesterone leads to elevated cortisol, and it further stresses reduced progesterone levels. And as I mentioned, progesterone is the calming hormone. So we have nothing to, we don't have that nice calming hormone to offset the stress hormone cortisol. But then that elevated cortisol is also disruptive of our thyroid. It reduces conversion of T4 to T3, which is kind of our main active thyroid hormone. And it also increases reverse T3 production. So there's a disruption of thyroid hormones as well. So it's really important for women during this transition to monitor their thyroid health, because you may need some intervention at this stage of the game, and it will also help with your symptoms. So a lot of hormone disarray going.
I love that way of describing it. I think when I'm working with clients or talking with people in community meetings at TFM, I often talk about how it may feel very unpredictable. What worked well a couple of months ago might not still be working the same way for you because the landscape is shifting a lot. And then, Amy, I wonder, based on all that you just described, I'm thinking insulin in my mind as you're talking. So as cortisol is increased and other things being what they are, less calming and things, what is that doing to insulin? And, I think that's part of what many women talk about struggling with during this time is what effect this has on insulin sensitivity versus insulin resistance.
Yeah, and I think if you're listening and what I sort of described, this hormonal situation, it can feel overwhelming, but just breathe. And there's a lot that you can do to kind of help your hormonal situation. And I think the first step is why I wanted to sort of set the stage with what's going on is just becoming aware of your hormonal patterns and knowing that you have a lot of power to make some shifts, especially with insulin resistance. And I think about it as kind of a multi-prong approach. As you mentioned about cortisol, as cortisol elevates, insulin also elevates and progesterone decreases. There's a lot that you can do by practicing daily habits that soothe your nervous system. So that's one really important piece of the puzzle, is to focus on ways to soothe your nervous system. I find that women in perimenopause can often feel like you're always in overdrive. I think a lot of women push themselves to go, go, go. And this is a time in life that we have to do the best that we can do to sort of soothe and regulate the stress response. So that's one way to increase insulin sensitivity. That declining estrogen, or that wildly fluctuating estrogen. Estrogen is such a protective factor of insulin resistance, and that's fluctuating. So you may find that, you're getting cravings that are coming out of nowhere, that you're more hungry, especially at certain times of your cycle. If you've sort of been tracking your cycle and how you feel during your cycle, you might find that there's times that you just are white knuckling it through fasting. So kind of understanding that estrogen plays a real role in how insulin is responding, and kind of working more with your body to support it during those fluctuations is really important as well.
It's really helpful for me the way you just described that, Amy, because I'm thinking about just kind of traditionally, I think many women experience cravings are up, especially maybe cravings for sweets or desserts or snack foods. The hunger hormone is elevated a bit, it seems, and so experiencing more hunger. And the way you describe it, as there are other more effective ways to support that hormonal picture that's happening, rather than going to those old fixes of, well, I can't help it, I'm going to have to go get some chocolate or something, but to really see that there are other ways to activate calming to the system and helping. What are some of your favorite ways to help calm the system?
I think it's as simple as doing more of what brings you joy. And I have learned that oftentimes when I am craving something sweet, I have to take a pause and ask myself, what am I really craving here? And how can I find sweetness in non-food ways? So I have a little list of things that bring me joy, and I have it kind of mentally handy. I can kind of run through it. Do I need to go for a walk out in nature? Do I need to just take a pause? And I love to read. So do I just need to pick up a book and spend 15 minutes without guilt, just reading, a chapter of my book? Can I call a friend and make a connection? So I have a list of things that really bring me joy, that help to soothe my stress response. I am a big fan of grounding, getting outside when I can. And now that the weather's nice and we're in summer, put my feet in the grass, or if I'm lucky enough to get to the beach, and really ground myself to the earth. And that reduces inflammation and centers me and really helps to calm my nervous system. Breath work, doing the box breath, breathe in for 4, hold it for 4, exhale for 4, and then take another break before you sort of go through that cycle again. That takes me from fight or flight when I'm feeling really stressed into a more calm state. So having these little tips and tricks to help soothe your nervous system. I will do some vagus nerve activation, and we could talk more about that, but humming or singing or some cold exposure, that also really helps to calm and soothe my nervous system. I used to turn to sugar and garbage to help numb me out and calm me, but that just made my health situation so much worse. So I've had to learn tools and tricks to find sweetness in non-food ways and calm my nervous system.
We're going to have to come back and do a whole nother episode on the vagus nerve piece. I love that you brought that in here. And I think it's so important to highlight these are actual things you can do at home that you don't need special equipment for. Yes, there are vagus nerve things you can do in a practitioner's office and things, but there's so much of this that you can do without anything really. Humming, singing, so many ways to kind of activate that calming. Because right now, as you highlighted, those hormones aren't providing that calming effect. And so utilizing these other ways, like you said, the cold exposure, so many great things. So thank you, Amy, for sharing those.
Just to reiterate that chronic stress, it really does raise cortisol, which in turn increases insulin resistance and worsens inflammation. The wonderful thing is you have it within your power to learn to downshift that nervous system. And if you want to get through perimenopause feeling well, this is foundational. Downshifting your nervous system, it's really not optional. So learn how to do that, and you'll have a much better 2 to 12 years during this phase of your life and beyond.
So, Amy, you just talked about, I think, the first kind of prong of what you described. The second prong being cooling inflammation. Can you say more about that?
Yeah, so we know that insulin resistance really drives up inflammation. And we've already kind of established that women in perimenopause, because of the hormonal situation, have elevated insulin resistance. So inflammation really is a big driver of weight gain, fatigue, mood issues, joint pain. A lot of those symptoms during perimenopause, the root causes can be more than just the insulin resistance. So looking at these other areas of your life to cool inflammation. So not only managing the insulin resistance, but poor sleep quality. It's a big driver of inflammation. And a lot of women experience poor sleep quality at this stage in life because of the lowering progesterone. Progesterone really helps with sleep, and it might be as simple as talking to your doctor about some bioidentical progesterone therapy, whether it's topical or oral. That can really help with sleep quality. We talk a lot about sleep here at the Fasting Method. We have group meetings about it. There's resources. Sleep, having high quality sleep, it's going to improve cortisol. It's going to improve your insulin resistance. So taking time to look at your sleep hygiene and try to get better sleep quality is going to help cool that inflammation. Stress, again, comes into this pillar of managing perimenopause. Elevated stress drives inflammation. So cooling your stress levels will cool inflammation. The other important piece here is looking at gut imbalances or food intolerances. Gut imbalances like SIBO, food sensitivities like gluten, dairy, or histamine intolerance, they can really drive up inflammation. So trying to identify any issues that you have and treat them, whether it's an elimination diet to kind of figure out what's going wrong, or work with a functional practitioner to find out what is going on with your gut. It's really important to cooling inflammation at this stage of the game. The other topic that I think is often overlooked is environmental toxins from plastics, pesticides, personal care products. These products can often add to the estrogen dominance issues and hormonal disarray, because a lot of compounds in plastics and pesticides and personal care products can mimic estrogen and bind to estrogen receptors and create problems. So really looking at living as clean as you can. Don't microwave your food in plastics. Really be mindful of things that have bisphenol A or BPA in them, and then try to purchase personal care products without phthalates and parabens. Can really go a long way to helping your hormonal situation and cooling inflammation. And then the last thing that I wanted to talk about is probably not a very popular, ask, but just to really be mindful of the alcohol, especially wine. It can really hit harder now than ever. And I'm not saying you can never have alcohol again. It's just be more mindful of it. It can really disrupt your gut microbiome. It can affect your sleep. If you start tracking your sleep with an Oura ring or other sleep tracker, you will most likely be able to see a connection with an evening that you've had a couple glasses of wine and your sleep quality that evening. And then, of course, if you're not sleeping well, it's going to drive up inflammation and cortisol and insulin resistance over time. So really being mindful of the alcohol you're consuming. You just don't metabolize it as well as you may have in earlier years. So working to cool that inflammation with stress reduction, improving your gut health and your sleep, and then your nourishment too. And we can talk about that as my sort of third pillar of managing perimenopause.
Yeah, I'm curious just to kind of hear more about how to help nourish what our body needs during this time. And it may be different than what we have found to be nourishing for our body in the other stages. So What are some of the things we should take into consideration?
I find that most clients that come to me who are really struggling, especially with appetite control, and they're having a hard time fasting, they are not eating enough protein. And I think they are surprised at the amount of protein that we like to see women in perimenopause trying to aim for 100 grams a day or more. But I think 100 grams a day is a good goal over 2 or 3 meals to preserve their muscle and support hormone production. And you really need to combine that with eating lots of healthy fats and fibrous vegetables. I think fiber and fibrous vegetables to help escort used up estrogen metabolites out of the body are kind of underrated. I don't think we hear enough about the importance of those types of veggies. The liver and our gut play a huge role in metabolizing and eliminating estrogen. So supporting our liver and our gut through food is really key. So I think prioritizing fiber and those fibrous vegetables are really important.
Amy, I think I've also heard you talk before about the value of exploring how you utilize carbohydrates during this time, how you use those as nourishing the body. I wondered if you could share something more about that.
Yeah, so in my early days of perimenopause, I was fasting and refueling, but I was doing it in a way that worked when I was younger, in my 30s. And as this hormonal disarray started beginning in these perimenopause years, I found that I was having a lot of cravings during that second half of my cycle, that luteal phase of my cycle. I was able to really fast well in the estrogen or the follicular phase of my cycle. But then I was really having trouble during that second phase of my cycle. And I thought I was to blame. I just wasn't trying hard enough until I really understood the role that my hormones were playing according to my cycle. So as I loosened up or turned down the fasting dial, like Terri talks about on different podcasts, I had to turn down the fasting dial sometimes, especially that week before my period, and know that that was okay. Tuning into my body and what it needs. It needed more nourishment during that time, and I needed to eat more and kind of replenish myself and do that without guilt. And I also realized that I needed some complex carbohydrates during that second part of my cycle, more so than I did in the first phase. I mean, I'm always eating fibrous vegetables and leafy greens. I don't really count those as carbs, but I do count root vegetables or winter squashes or other carbohydrate like quinoa. I kind of refrain from those in the first part of the cycle. I don't really feel like I need them, but I have found that I need some carbs in that second half of the cycle to feel rooted and grounded and to avoid leaning on more refined carbohydrates and sugar. So if I don't add those in, then I find that I'm really craving carbs that don't serve me well. The other thing is that being a woman with PCOS, my progesterone level is already low. So when you go into perimenopause already low in progesterone, you want to make sure that you can do whatever it can to support progesterone production. And carbs actually support progesterone production. Glucose availability is really important for the corpus luteum to produce adequate progesterone. And if you're really extremely restricting carbs during the luteal phase, it may suppress the progesterone production and lead to lower progesterone in that phase. The other thing too is if you are suffering with thyroid function, especially conversion of T4 to T3, carbohydrates are necessary for that conversion. So I think that carb cycling during this stage of the game in that second half of the cycle can be helpful for a lot of people. I do want to say too that everybody is different and you have to know your body. After the years of kind of working on my insulin resistance, I am more metabolically flexible than I was earlier on in my journey. And my body can tolerate root vegetables like sweet potato or beets. And you have to figure out what you can tolerate. So it's not a blanket statement that everybody needs carbs at this stage of the game in this luteal phase. But it's an opportunity to experiment to see how your body might respond. Can you get through that second half of your cycle with more ease and less cravings and feeling more stable? Does it improve your sleep and regulate your mood and reduce some PMS symptoms if you add a little bit of carbohydrate at this stage? You have to experiment. And it's not going to be the same for everyone, but I think it's important for people to kind of be aware of that connection with carbs and the support of that luteal phase of your cycle.
I think that's so important to hear you describe that, Amy, because I know so many people who listen to this podcast or who are members at TFM focus on a lower carbohydrate approach. And to hear you kind of describe that there are ways of incorporating certain carbohydrates in ways that nourish us, that it's not just a blanket statement of, yes, go ahead and add whatever you want, but yours are very targeted. And the other piece that you really highlighted is figuring out what works for you. There is not one right amount or which carbohydrates are the right ones for anyone. So I really appreciate the way you described that this is an important time to be exploring. Do I need to do some carb cycling? Do I need to find some whole food carbohydrates that can help nourish me during this time?
Yeah, and I think it's really adding carbs strategically. I would look at doing it in your last meal to aid sleep and minimize blood sugar disruption. And also do not eat naked carbs. Really pair them with fat and fiber and even acid like vinegar or lactic acid. You could sort of have a little side of sauerkraut or some other fermented food or citric acid. Those will all help to kind of buffer that glucose response when you're eating carbohydrates. And of course, your protein and fat first.
Amy, you mentioned earlier kind of your own experience of at this certain phase in your life approaching fasting and things the same way you had previously. So I'm curious, during perimenopause, how might women look differently at fasting or approach it differently to help support them during this time?
Yeah, of course. So really in that follicular phase, the first kind of 15 or so days of your cycle from your period to ovulation, estrogen is rising and insulin sensitivity is better. And you can typically fast more aggressively. The food chatter really isn't there as much. I think this time frame is a great time to go for your longer fasts. Do some extended fasting or your alternate day fasting. It's just is easier. You kind of feel like you're in the flow and it just comes very easily. When you're approaching ovulation, ovulation is a time when you need a lot of nourishment and nutrients, to support ovulation. So maybe a day or two of some refueling time, 2 or 3 meals a day with lots of protein, fat, and fiber around that stage. And then you can probably get a little bit more fasting in as you lead up to your period. But as you go into that luteal phase after ovulation, you may notice your body is becoming more and more insulin resistant. I find for me, I can still fast up to about a week before my period. And then I become really hungry. And it's funny, Terri, it's a very subtle kind of message. And I have to be really aware of it. If I notice that I'm out and about and I start convincing myself that I can just drive through the Starbucks line at 3 o'clock and get a latte, and that would just be fine. I have to really monitor that internal chatter and that hunger chatter and know that that's usually the insulin talking and not Amy talking. And so that's when I may need to dial back the fasting dial. And it's a time for me to be gentler with myself with just some time restricted eating, real nutrient dense meals, adding in those healthy carbs like we talked about, squash or maybe some berries or sweet potatoes. And this cyclical approach, I find that it really honors my body and it prevents me from being burnt out from fasting and when I'm white knuckling it through the whole month, like I did in my early 40s. Just knowing that you're not failing when fasting feels harder, it's your hormones shifting and your strategy just needs to shift with them.
You have such a good balancing way of describing these things. I could listen to you all day. You just have such a gentle way of saying these things that I think we need to hear.
I spent a good bit of my life beating myself up for things that I felt like I couldn't do. And it wasn't until I took kind of a gentle, more partnering approach with myself that things started to shift with me. And it's been a long process, but I've realized that being kind of my own cheerleader and coach is what works for me. We don't need to beat ourselves up, but knowing that there's nothing wrong with us, it's our hormones shifting and we need to just be aware of them and honor it. And I think with perimenopause, it's a season and it's not about pushing harder. It's about tuning in. And when you align with your body instead of fighting it, when you partner with it, then it's so true. Everything really begins to shift in the right direction.
Yeah, everything you've shared here today really is about how do I work with my body during this time to support it, not fight it, not wrangle it to do what I want it to do, but really to support it. So I really appreciate your approach to this.
Well, thank you so much for letting me be here and sharing some of my insights over the years, just going through perimenopause myself and helping hundreds of women do the same.
Absolutely. Well, Amy, I am looking forward to having you back on the podcast to continue talking about hormonal health and lots of other things that you bring to the fasting method. So thank you for being here, and thank you everyone for listening, and we will be back next week with another episode. Take good care, everyone.